In a universe where power is bought and sold, Kael thought he had seen it all. But when he stumbled upon an auction for women of the stars, Ceres was unlike any other. A deadly beauty, bound in chains but not broken. She was worth more than any currency, more than any price. For just 10 credits, Kael could take her. Just one simple exchange, one night, and she would be his. But the moment their eyes met, something changed. The transaction wasn't just about money anymore. Ceres was no ordinary prize. She had a fire in her eyes, and Kael found himself trapped in her orbit. She wasn't just someone to be bought. She was someone he couldn't let go. But 10 credits was the price, and Kael was ready to pay. The question is, what happens when you fall for someone you weren't supposed to? Want to know what happens next? Subscribe now and join Kael and Ceres as they navigate the dangerous worlds of love, power, and passion. This is just the beginning. Don't miss the ride. The starling groaned like an old dog settling into a nap as it touched down on Dranksvale, a port that looked like the galaxy's junk drawer. Rusted ships dangling from cranes like gutted beasts, neon signs spitting static in a dozen alien tongues, and air thick with the stench of scorched metal and broken dreams. Kael Draven, pilot, part-time smuggler, and full-time avoider of feelings, stepped onto the cracked tarmac, his boots kicking up dust that sparkled like fool's gold under flickering lights. He adjusted his leather jacket, patched at the elbows, and muttered to himself, "Welcome to the armpit of the universe. Population, me, and my terrible life choices." Dranksvale was a maze of steel and desperation, where everything was for sale: circuit boards, body mods, souls, you name it. Hovering drones barked advertisements, cybernetic lungs, half price. Genuine Velithian wine, only mildly poisoned. Kael weaved through the chaos, dodging a Signan trader with oily tentacles waving data pads, and a Terran mercenary with a mechanical arm that clicked like a grumpy clock. His mission was simple: find a new energy filter for the Starling, maybe grab a cheap meal that didn't taste like regret, and get out before the place sucked him dry. "Easy peasy," he said, winking at a passing android who ignored him. "Just don't make eye contact with anyone who smells like trouble. Or opportunity." Same thing here. But trouble, as it often did, found him first. He turned a corner into a crowded plaza, where a raised platform of warped metal loomed like a stage for the galaxy's cruelest theater. Chains clinked. A voice, greasy and loud, boomed over a crackling speaker. "Next lot, folks. Prime merchandise, fresh off the block." Kael froze. An auction, not a scene. He'd seen too many. People reduced to numbers, lives traded for pocket change. His hand brushed the empty holster at his hip, a habit from days when he carried more than sarcasm as a weapon. "Keep walking, Kael," he muttered. "Filters that way. Heartbreaks this way." But his feet didn't listen. The crowd parted, and there she was. On the platform stood a woman. No, an alien, Velithian by the look of her. Her skin shimmered purple, like twilight trapped in a pearl, catching every stray beam of light. Her black hair fell in uneven waves, framing a face that was all sharp angles. High cheekbones, lips full and defiant, eyes like twin voids that could swallow stars. She was thin, too thin, her frame wrapped in a ragged tunic that did little to hide the curves of her hips or the rise of her chest. Chains bound her wrists, not tight enough to lift her off the ground, but enough to scream you're nothing. Yet she stood tall, chin low, gaze distant, as if she'd already left this place behind. 10 credits, the auctioneer, a squat Goran with a cybernetic eye glowing red, shouted. 10 measly credits for this beauty. Quiet as a shadow, folks. No fuss, no fight. We call her the songbird. Sings when she thinks no one's listening. The crowd muttered. A Vorik with eyes like burning coals snorted. 10 credits? She's half dead already. A Terran woman in spiked armor laughed. Looks like she'd break if you breathed on her. Kael's jaw tightened. He didn't know why, but those words hit like a punch. Maybe it was her eyes. Dark, empty, but with a flicker of something fierce, like a storm waiting to break. Maybe it was the memory of Lila, his sister, her brown eyes bright until the slavers took her. He'd promised to find her, scoured half the galaxy, only to kneel at a nameless grave. Not again, he whispered, so soft he barely heard himself. Hey, mister. A small voice broke his trance. Kael looked down to find a kid, alien, Claren, maybe 8 years old, with green skin and silver eyes that shone like polished coins. His hair was a mess of black curls, and he clutched a broken crystal shard like it was a teddy bear. His oversized jacket dragged on the ground, patched with tape and hope. Kid, I'm busy brooding, Kael said, raising an eyebrow. Unless you're selling energy filters, scoot. The boy, Moreau, Kael would learn later, grinned, showing a gap where a tooth should have been. You look like you need a friend. Or a snack. I know a guy who sells glow fruit, only slightly radioactive. Kael chuckled despite himself. Tempting, but I'm on a no-glowing food diet. What's your deal, kid? You live here. Miro's grin faded, just for a second. Everybody lives somewhere, right? Me. I'm a vent crawler. Sneak around, find stuff. Found her singing once. He nodded toward the platform. She's different, mister. They all cry or scream. She just sings. Like she's telling the stars she's still here. Kael's eyes flicked back to the woman. Saris, though he didn't know her name yet. As if on cue, a sound slipped from her lips, soft, almost lost in the crowd's noise. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the chaos like a silver arrow, a melody without words, weaving images of glowing fields and windswept skies. Valethian, Kael realized. A song of home, sung by someone who'd forgotten what home felt like. The crowd didn't care. A burly trader spat on the ground. Singing? Useless. Can she work a forge? Another, a Vorik with a voice like gravel, growled, 15 credits. I'll take the purple one. She'll look good in my collection. Kael's blood boiled. Collection? He muttered. Buddy, the only thing you're collecting is bad decisions. He didn't mean to say it out loud, but the Vorik turned, eyes narrowing. You got something to say, human? Kael smirked, leaning against a crate like he owned the place. Oh, just admiring your charm. Tell me, do you polish those eyes to get that creepy glow? Or is it natural? The crowd snickered. The Vorik snarled but didn't push it. Kael's hand twitched, wishing for his old blaster, but he'd sold it to fix the Starling last month. Great, he thought. Antagonize a walking furnace with nothing but wit. Classic Kael. Moreau tugged his sleeve. Mister, you gonna let him take her? She don't belong in a cage. Nobody does. Kael crouched to Miro's level, his gray eyes meeting the boy's silver ones. Geet, Imnoru. Heroes get medals. I get bills. And right now, my wallet's screaming retreat. But you saw her, Moreau whispered like it was a secret. I saw you look. You didn't look away. Kael sighed. The kid was right. He hadn't looked away. Saris's gaze had locked onto him for a split second. Not pleading, not defiant, just there. Like a signal flare in a void. It burned into him, stirring memories of Lila's last smile, her voice saying, Find me, Kael. He hadn't. But maybe, just maybe, he could find someone else. 10 credits, the auctioneer bellowed. Going once. Come on, she's a steal. Throw in the chains for free. Kael stood, heart pounding. This is dumb, he muttered. So dumb. I need a filter, not a situation. But his hand was already up. 10 credits, he shouted. The crowd went quiet. The Vorik glared, raising a clawed hand. 15. Kael's mouth moved before his brain caught up. 20. He winced. His account had exactly 10 credits. Maybe 12 if he sold his boots. Why am I like this? He groaned under his breath. The auctioneer grinned, cybernetic eye whirring. 20 credits. Humans got spirit. Anyone else? The Vorik hesitated, then spat, waste of coin. He stormed off, leaving a trail of smoke. Kael exhaled, realizing he'd just bet everything on a stranger. Well, he said to Moreau, guess I'm broke now. Hope she's worth it. Moreau beamed. She is. You'll see. The auctioneer waved Kael forward. He thumbed his ID chip, praying the transfer wouldn't bounce. A soft beep confirmed it. 10 credits, not 20. The Goran didn't notice, too busy counting his cut. The chains hissed open, and Sarah stumbled, catching herself before she fell. Her eyes flicked to Kael, not grateful, not scared, just searching like she was reading his soul and finding it wanting. "Easy, songbird," Kael said, keeping his voice light. "No cages where we're going. Just a ship that smells like coffee and bad decisions." She didn't speak, didn't move. Her lips parted, then closed, like words were too heavy to carry. Moreau darted to her side, small hand hovering near hers. "It's okay," he whispered. "He's loud, but he's nice. Kind of like a glow fruit, bright, but not too radioactive." Kael snorted. "Kid, you're gonna ruin my rep." He glanced at Saris, softening his tone. "Name's Kael. That's Moreau, resident troublemaker. You don't have to talk, but you're coming with us. Deal." Saris's gaze lingered on him, then dropped to the ground. She nodded, barely, and stepped off the platform, her bare feet silent on the metal. The crowd dispersed, already forgetting her. Kael led the way, Moreau bouncing beside him, Saris trailing like a shadow. "So," Kael said, glancing back, "any chance you know where to find a cheap energy filter? 'Cause I just spent my lunch money on, well, you." Saris didn't answer, but Moreau piped up. "I know a guy. He's got filters, but you gotta trade something shiny." "Got anything shiny, Kael?" "Only my charm," Kael quipped, winking. "And trust me, it's the shiniest thing here." They reached the Starling, its hull scarred but proud, crouched in docking bay 9 like a sleeping dragon. Kael tapped the ramp code, and it lowered with a hiss, spilling warm light into the cold air. Saris hesitated, her breath catching, like freedom was a trick she didn't trust. "It's not much," Kael said, gesturing inside, "but it's home. Smells better than Drinksvale, I promise. Unless you hate coffee. Then we're in trouble." Moreau tugged her sleeve. "Come on, Songbird. It's got blankets and everything." "I checked." Saris looked at the boy, then at Kael, her eyes softer now, like ice starting to thaw. She stepped onto the ramp, and Kael felt something shift in his chest. Not hope, not yet, but something close. Something dangerous. As the ramp closed, sealing them away from Drinksvale, Kael leaned against the wall, watching Saris's silhouette in the dim light. "Well," he muttered, "here's to new adventures. Or spectacular disasters. Probably both." Moreau grinned. "You're gonna like her, Kael. She's got stories in her songs." Kael raised an eyebrow. "Stories, huh? Hope they're better than mine. 'Cause mine usually end with me eating instant noodles alone." The Starling hummed to life, and for the first time in years, Kael wondered if alone was about to change. The Starling hummed like a grumpy old cat, its engines purring just loud enough to remind everyone it was alive but not thrilled about it. Inside, the ship was a patchwork of scars and stubborn charm. Narrow corridors lined with loose cables that sparked like fireflies, flickering yellow lights that cast long shadows, and a faint smell of burnt coffee clinging to every surface. The mess hall, if you could call it that, was a cramped nook with a splintered wooden table, littered with empty mugs and a half-dead plant Kael Draven swore he'd water someday. "Home sweet chaos," he said, leaning against a bulkhead, his leather jacket creaking. "Beats Drinksvale, right? No offense to the galaxy's favorite dumpster fire." Kael glanced at his two new passengers, who were about as comfortable as cats in a bathtub. Moreau, the Clyran kid with silver eyes and a grin that could melt asteroids, was sprawled on a bench, fiddling with his broken crystal shard like it was a puzzle only he could solve. Saris, the Valethian woman with skin like a twilight pearl and hair black as a moonless night, had claimed a corner near the ship's heater. She sat cross-legged, wrapped in a threadbare blanket that did little to hide the curves of her hips or the way her chest rose with each cautious breath. Her purple skin caught the heater's glow, shimmering like a nebula trapped in flesh, but her eyes, dark, guarded, stayed fixed on the floor, as if trusting the world was a gamble she'd already lost. "So," Kael said, clapping his hands with exaggerated cheer, "welcome to the Starling Tour. To your left, we have walls. To your right, more walls. Up ahead, my sparkling personality. Any questions?" Moreau giggled, swinging his legs. "Does this ship have a name 'cause it sings? Like, starlings? The birds?" Kael raised an eyebrow, impressed. "Kid, you're sharper than my last haircut." "Nah, Its name 'cause it's scrappy and stubborn, like me. Plus, Starling sounds cooler than Rusty Bucket, which was my second choice. Saris didn't react, her fingers tightening on the blanket. Every noise, the creak of the hull, the hum of the heater, made her flinch like she was waiting for chains to snap back around her wrists. Kael noticed his grin softening. "Okay, Songbird," he said gently. "No pressure, but if you need anything, food, a pillow, a bad joke, I'm your guy. I've got an endless supply of the last one." "She don't talk much," Moreau piped up, scooting closer to Saris, but keeping his distance, like he knew her edges were sharp. "But that's okay. My mom used to say, quiet folks got the loudest stories." "Right, Songbird." Saris's gaze flicked to Moreau, then back to the floor. No words, just a slight softening in her jaw, like his voice was a breeze she didn't mind. Kael watched, his chest tightening. He'd seen that look before. Lila, years ago, silent after their parents died, her eyes saying what her voice couldn't. "Give her time, kid," he said, more to himself than Moreau. "Time's the one thing this ship's got plenty of." He busied himself at the counter, rummaging through dented cans and packets of instant soup. "Let's see, mystery broth or mystery broth. Tough choice." He held up a can, squinting at the faded label. "Says protein blend. Could be chicken. Could be sadness. Who's hungry?" Miro's hand shot up. "Me. Can I have two?" "Oh, and tell Songbird about the dragon comets. She'll like that." Kael chuckled, pouring water into a dented kettle. "Dragon comets, huh? Kid, you're stealing my spotlight." He glanced at Saris, keeping his tone light. "Miro's got this story about comets that eat clouds and fart rainbows. True story, right?" "Not fart," Moreau protested, laughing. "They breathe rainbows. Like whoosh." He waved his arms, nearly knocking over his crystal. "They fly super fast, and if you catch one, it takes you to a planet where nobody's sad ever." Saris's lips twitched. Not a smile, but close, like a star peeking through clouds. Kael caught it, his heart doing a weird flip. "See that, Moreau? You're winning her over. Keep going, and I'll be out of a job." He carried a steaming mug of water to Saris, careful not to crowd her. "Not soup yet, just water. Gotta start small." He crouched a foot away, holding the mug out. "No strings attached, promise. I'm not that kind of guy, mostly 'cause I'm terrible at knots." Her eyes lifted, meeting his for a heartbeat. They were deep like pools of midnight, and Kael felt a jolt. Not just her beauty, but something raw, like she was sizing him up and finding him not awful. She reached for the mug, her fingers brushing his. The blanket slipped, exposing the curve of her waist, where her skin gleamed like velvet under starlight. Kael's hand grazed her side, accidental, fleeting, but enough to send a spark up his arm. Her warmth lingered on his fingertips, soft and electric, like touching a live wire wrapped in silk. Saris froze, her breath catching, lips parting just enough to show a hint of purple. Her eyes darted to his, then away, cheeks darkening to a deeper violet. Kael pulled back, clearing his throat. "Whoops," he said, voice lighter than he felt. "Clumsy me. No harm done, right? I mean, unless you're allergic to awkward humans." She clutched the mug, hands trembling, but didn't retreat. Kael stood, giving her space, his pulse loud in his ears. "Okay, Kael," he muttered, turning away. "Stick to soup, not whatever that was." Moreau, oblivious, was back to his comet story. "So, Songbird, the dragons live in this big nebula, right? All sparkly like your skin. I bet you've seen him back on your planet." "Did you?" Saris's fingers tightened on the mug, her knuckles pale against her purple skin. She didn't answer, but her shoulders eased, like Miro's chatter was a rope pulling her from a dark place. Kael watched, stirring soup that smelled vaguely like regret. He didn't know her story, didn't know Valeth, didn't know what broke her, but he knew silence. He'd lived it too long. "Hey, Moreau," he said, keeping his tone casual, "you ever think about being a pilot? You'd be great, zooming around, telling comets to behave." Miro's eyes lit up. "Me? Fly this thing? Can I try now?" Kael laughed. "Slow down, Captain Chaos. Let's eat first. This ship's cranky on an empty stomach, kinda like me." He ladled soup into mismatched bowls, sliding one to Moreau and setting another near Saris, not too close. No rush, he told her. It's here when you're ready. Probably tastes like socks, but it's warm socks, so progress. Moreau slurped his soup, making faces. Tastes like space dirt. You cook this, Kael. Excuse you, Kael said, mock offended. This is gourmet space dirt. 5 stars on the sad snack scale. Saris watched them, her mug untouched, steam curling like a ghost. Kael caught her gaze, offering a lopsided grin. What's the verdict, Songbird? Am I a chef, a comedian, or just a guy with a ship and 0 plans? She didn't smile, but her eyes held his longer this time, searching, maybe finding something worth seeing. Then, soft as a whisper, she spoke, her voice low and melodic, like wind through reeds. Thank you for not pushing. Kael blinked, caught off guard. His grin faltered, replaced by something softer, realer. Hey, he said, voice quiet, no pushing here. This ship's a judgment-free zone. Well, except for Moreau's table manners. Those are criminal. Moreau stuck out his tongue, soup dripping from his chin. You're just jealous 'cause I eat faster. Saris's lips curved, not quite a smile, but enough to light a spark in Kael's chest. He leaned back, folding his arms, pretending his heart wasn't racing. Okay, kid, he said, you win this round. But I'm watching you, Soup Bandit. The starling droned on, carrying them deeper into the void. Saris sipped her water, slow, deliberate, like testing freedom one drop at a time. Kael watched her, not staring, just noticing. The way her hair fell across her shoulder, the way her chest rose with each breath, the way she existed, fragile but fierce, like a flame that refused to die. So, he said, breaking the silence, where to next? I mean, besides away from Drinksvale. Got any dream destinations, Songbird? Moreau? I'm open to suggestions, long as they don't involve exploding. Moreau bounced in his seat. Somewhere with dragons. Or candy. Or both. Kael smirked. Candy dragons? Kid, you're speaking my language. He glanced at Saris. Soften now. What about you? No pressure, just curious. She didn't answer, but her eyes flicked to the viewport, where stars glittered like promises. Kael nodded, understanding more than she said. Stars it is, he murmured. Best place to start. The heater hummed, Moreau chattered, and the starling flew on, a tiny speck in an endless night, carrying 3 souls who didn't yet know they'd found each other. The starling sailed through the void like a stubborn old mule, its hull creaking with every shift in the starfield. Inside, the ship was a cocoon of warmth and chaos, cables dangling like vines, lights buzzing like sleepy bees, and the ever-present scent of Kael Draven's terrible coffee lingering like a bad guest. The engine room, a tangle of pipes and blinking panels, was where Saris had started spending her days, her purple fingers dancing over circuits with a grace that made Kael's jaw drop. Not that he'd admit it out loud. Okay, Songbird, he said, poking his head through the hatch. You're making my ship look good, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. I'm a pretty one here, right? Saris didn't look up, her black hair spilling over one shoulder as she coaxed a faint glow from a dead console. Her skin shimmered under the engine's amber light, like a canvas of twilight, her curves, soft hips, a chest that drew the eye despite her baggy tunic, moving with quiet purpose. She wasn't just fixing wires. She was sculpting light, bending it into swirls and pulses that reminded Kael of waves he'd never seen. Whoa, he said, leaning against the wall, his leather jacket creaking. That's not tech. That's poetry. You writing sonnets to my ship, or what? Her fingers paused, eyes flicking to him, dark, searching, but less guarded than before. It's what I know, she said, voice low, like a melody half-remembered. Light listens if you ask it right. Kael grinned, twirling a wrench like a baton. Light's got better manners than me, then. I ask it to behave, it just flickers. You got a gift, Songbird. Where'd you learn to make circuits sing like that? She hesitated, lips parting, then closing. Kael waited, keeping his grin easy, like he wasn't dying to know her story. Moreau, sprawled on a crate nearby, saved the moment, his silver eyes wide. Bet she learned it on her planet. Right, Songbird? Was it all glowy and cool like your skin? Saris's gaze softened, her hands resuming their dance. Valeth, she said, so soft it was almost a breath. Fields of grass that glowed at night. I shaped light into birds for festivals. Children chased them, laughing. Kael's grin faded just a touch. Sounds like a place worth missing. You were what? The resident artist? Making kids happy? That's a good gig. Her shoulders tensed, fingers faltering. She whispered. Not anymore. Moreau tilted his head, crystal shard glinting in his hands. You could do it again. Make a light bird for me. I'd chase it, promise. Kael chuckled, ruffling Moreau's curls. Kid, you'd chase a comet if it sparkled. But he's right, Songbird. That's not just fixing. That's magic. You're bringing my ship back to life, one glow at a time. Saris didn't reply, but her lips curved. Not a smile, not yet, but close. She turned back to the console, light curling under her touch like a living thing, forming waves, then spirals, like echoes of her lost home. Kael watched, mesmerized, his usual quips stuck in his throat. She wasn't just surviving. She was rebuilding herself, piece by piece, and it hit him harder than he expected. Okay, he said, clearing his throat. Enough of me playing cheerleader. Want to try something new? Like, say, flying this bucket? I'm a great teacher. Ask Moreau. I taught him how to burn toast perfectly. Moreau giggled, kicking his legs. It was crispy. You said it was art. Abstract art. Kael corrected, winking. Come on, Songbird. Cockpit's calling. No pressure, just a chance to steer the stars. Saris looked up, eyes wide, like he'd offered her a planet. Fly, she said, voice trembling with something, fear, hope, maybe both. Yup, Kael said, jerking a thumb toward the corridor. Unless you'd rather keep romancing my circuits. Your call. She stood, slow, smoothing her tunic, her hips swaying just enough to make Kael's pulse skip. He led her to the cockpit, Moreau trailing like a puppy, chattering about comets and candy. The cockpit was a dome of glass and steel, stars sprawling beyond like a spilled jewelry box. Saris froze, her breath catching, her skin glowing under the starlight like a living constellation. Pretty, right? Kael said, sliding into the pilot's seat. Sit here. He patted the co-pilot's chair, keeping his tone light. No crashing allowed, but if we do, I'll blame Moreau. Not me, Moreau protested, climbing onto a crate to watch. Songbird's gonna be awesome. Right, Songbird? Saris sat, hands hovering over the controls, her chest rising with quick breaths. Kael leaned over, pointing at the yoke. Easy does it, he said, voice low, steady. Like petting a dragon comet. Gentle but firm. The ship jolted, a hiccup in the engines, and Saris flinched. Kael steadied her, his hand brushing her hip, soft, warm, the curve of it like a secret whispered in starlight. She tensed, her lips parting, a faint flush darkening her purple cheeks. Kael froze, his fingers tingling, the scent of her hair, wild like mint and rain, filling his senses. He said, pulling back, sorry, Songbird. Ship's got a mind of its own, or I'm just a klutz. Pick one. Her eyes met his, not angry, not scared, just curious like she was seeing him for the first time. It's okay, she murmured, voice barely audible over the hum. Kael grinned, heart pounding. Cool. Let's not tell Moreau I almost broke the ship. He'd never let me live it down. I saw that, Moreau called, giggling. You're all red, Kael. Like a glow fruit. Traitor, Kael shot back, but his grin widened. He guided Saris's hands to the yoke, careful not to touch her again. Feel it, he said. She's alive, this ship. Just listen. Saris nodded, her fingers tightening, steering with a hesitance that turned to focus. The starling responded, gliding smoother, like it trusted her too. Kael leaned back, watching her, the stars framing her like a painting he'd never dare touch. Later, in the mess hall, Saris spoke, unprompted, her voice cutting through Moreau's chatter about rainbow comets. I killed someone, she said, flat, like confessing a sin to strangers. A slaver. I was like a snake. I watched him, learned his steps, his keys. One night, I broke my chains, pushed him into the ship's hold. heard his bones snap. She paused, eyes distant. I didn't cry. I just ran. But I'm scared it made me wrong. Kael set his mug down, slow, his grin gone. Wrong? He said, voice soft but firm. Songbird, you survived. That guy? He made his choices. You made yours. Don't let his shadow tell you who you are. Moreau blinked, clutching his crystal. You're not wrong, he said, small but fierce. You're you. Like my mom. She fought too. Saris looked at them, eyes shimmering, not with tears but something close. I don't know who I am, she said. Not anymore. Kael leaned forward, elbows on the table. Then find out. You've got time, a ship, and us, two knuckleheads who believe in you. That's a start, right? Moreau nodded, pulling a piece of scrap metal from his pocket. He'd scratched lines into it. 3 stick figures under a lopsided star. Look, he said, shoving it towards Saris. It's us. Kael, me, and you. Family of stars. You're the light fixer. Saris stared at the drawing, her fingers tracing the lines. Then, for the first time, she smiled, small, fragile, but real, like a sunrise after endless night. Light fixer, she echoed, voice warm. Kael's heart flipped, but he kept his grin casual. See? Official crew now. No takebacks. Moreau's the boss, clearly. I am not. Moreau laughed, tossing a crumb at Kael. You're the boss, but you're bad at soup. Harsh critic, Kael said, clutching his chest. Songbird, back me up here. My soup's legendary, right? Saris's smile lingered, her eyes meeting his. It's warm, she said, a spark of humor in her voice. Kael laughed, loud and free, the sound filling the starling like light. Warm. I'll take it. We're making progress, crew. The ship flew on, stars spinning beyond, and Saris sat a little straighter, her hands steady, her smile a promise of more to come. The starling cut through the black like a stubborn spark, its engines grumbling as if they knew trouble was coming. Inside, the mess hall was a clutter of mugs and hope, the air thick with the smell of Kael Draven's latest culinary disaster. Burnt protein paste he'd optimistically called dinner. Kael leaned against the counter, his leather jacket slung over a chair, gray eyes glinting with mischief. Okay, crew, he said, waving a spoon like a scepter. Who's ready for round 2 of Chef Kael's gourmet gloop? 5 stars, guaranteed to stick to your ribs. Or your shoes. Moreau, perched on a bench, wrinkled his green nose, silver eyes sparkling. Smells like engine grease, Kael. You sure it's food? Harsh critic, Kael said, clutching his chest. This is art, kid. You'll thank me when you're not starving. He glanced at Saris, who sat near the heater, her purple skin glowing like a dusk-lit sea, her black hair framing a face that was softer now, less haunted. Her tunic hugged her curves, hips that swayed like a melody, a chest that caught the light, but her eyes, dark and steady, held a strength Kael couldn't look away from. Songbird, he said, softer, you in for some gloop? Or are you sticking to water and mystery? Saris's lips twitched, almost a smile. Water, she said, voice low melodic. It's safer. Wise choice, Kael said, winking. My cooking's a high-risk adventure, like wrestling a comet with a fork. Moreau giggled, but his laughter cut off as he fiddled with a cracked data pad he'd scavenged from Drink's Veil. The screen flickered, spitting static, then bloomed into a hologram. A grainy image of a Claren woman, her silver eyes dulled by exhaustion, her green skin pale under a tight braid. She stood in a line of workers, a collar around her neck, hands raw from labor. Moreau froze, his crystal shard slipping to the floor with a clink. That's her, he whispered, voice trembling. That's Mama. Lyra. Kael's grin vanished. He crossed the room in 2 strides, crouching beside Moreau. Hey, kid, he said, gentle but firm. You sure? A lot of faces out there. Could be. It's her, Moreau said, fiercer now, pointing at the braid. She tied it like that when she told me stories. About stars and singers. She's alive, Kael. She's alive. Saris leaned forward, her blanket slipping, eyes wide. Where? She asked, voice sharp, like she knew the weight of a lost parent. Moreau tapped the pad, pulling up text. Some place called Crimson Reach. A mining camp. They dig glowstones. It's bad, Kael. Real bad. Kael's jaw tightened, memories of Lila flickering. Her laugh, her eyes, gone because he hadn't been fast enough. He shoved the thought down, forcing a grin. Crimson Reach, huh? Sounds like a lovely vacation spot. Red sand, glowing rocks, probably a 5-star spa with chains included. He ruffled Miro's curls. We'll check it out, kid. Promise. Miro's eyes shone, not with tears, but hope. You mean it? We're gonna find her. Cross my heart, Kael said, drawing an X on his chest. Or my coffee mug, which is way more sacred. Saris watched him, her gaze piercing, like she saw the cracks he hid. It's dangerous, she said, not a question. Kael shrugged, standing. Danger's my middle name. Well, actually, it's Reginald, but don't tell anyone. Ruins my vibe. That night, the Starling's cockpit was a bubble of starlight. Kael hunched over charts while Saris checked the ship's systems, her fingers weaving light across panels like a painter. Miro slept in the mess hall, clutching his crystal, dreaming of his mother. Got a contact, Kael said, voice low, tapping a comms unit. Old smuggler buddy, owes me a favor. Says Crimson Reach is a fortress, cameras, drones, one nasty Signan boss named Vrek. Loves his credits and his ego. Saris nodded, her hair brushing her shoulders, catching the glow. Engines are ready, she said. We can outrun trouble, if we're fast. Kael grinned, leaning back. Fast is my specialty. Well, that and bad puns. You holding up, Songbird? This ain't exactly a joyride. She met his eyes, steady. For Miro, she said. I'll hold. His heart did a flip, but he kept it light. That's my crew. Toughest artist I ever met. Now, let's not die yet. Crimson Reach loomed like a wound in the galaxy, a red planet choked with dust that swirled like blood in the wind. Towering smokestacks stabbed the sky, belching fumes, while slaves toiled below, mining crystals that pulsed like trapped stars. The Starling landed in a hidden canyon, cloaked by Saris's tweaks to its signal. Kael strapped on a belt, empty of weapons, thanks to his broke status, but packed with bravado. Plan's simple, he said, pacing the ramp. I go in, play nice by Lyra's freedom. You two stay here, keep the ship warm. Miro's face fell, silver eyes pleading. Iwana come, Kael. I want Mama to see me first. Kael crouched, hands on Miro's shoulders. Kid, you're the VIP. If this goes south, you and Songbird get the Starling out. Your mom'd kill me if I let you get hurt. Deal. Miro pouted but nodded. Deal. But you better bring her back. Scout's honor, Kael said, saluting, though I got kicked out of Scouts for eating all the cookies. Sarah stepped closer, her voice soft. Be careful, Kael. He flashed a grin, hiding the knot in his gut. Careful's my other middle name. Right after Reginald. Back soon, Songbird. The mining camp was a maze of steel and misery, guards patrolling with shock staves, drones buzzing like wasps. Kael slipped in, posing as a trader, his jacket swapped for a dusty cloak. Vrek's office was a gaudy den, gold-plated walls, screens showing crystal halls. The Signan himself was a mountain of flesh, tentacles twitching, eyes like oil slicks. You're the human, he drawled, voice dripping venom. What's your offer for my worker? She's a good one, quiet, strong. Kael forced a smile, stomach churning. Got credits, he said, sliding a chip across the desk. Enough to make you happy. One Claren woman, braided hair, silver eyes. Name's Lyra. Vrek laughed, tentacles slapping the desk. That one? Worth more than your pathetic stack. She digs fast, doesn't break. Try again, human. Kael's smile didn't waver, but his fists clenched. Oh, come on, Vreki. You're breaking my heart. How about a deal? Credits plus something shiny. He reached into his pocket, heart sinking, and pulled out his father's dagger. Steel, worn, the hilt engraved with hope. Lila had held it once, laughing, before everything fell apart. He set it down, voice steady. This do it. Vrek's eyes gleamed, snatching the dagger. Sentimental fool, he sneered. Fine. She's yours. Don't expect a refund. Kael swallowed, the loss cutting deeper than he'd admit. Wouldn't dream of it, pal. Where is she? Vrek waved a tentacle, and a guard dragged Lyra in, thin, bruised, but standing tall, her braid frayed but proud. Her silver eyes locked on Kael, wary, then widened as Miro's voice echoed from the calms in his ear. "Kael, is that her? Is it Mama?" "Easy, kid," Kael muttered, then louder, "Lyra, right? Got someone who's been looking for you." Her lips trembled, hope flickering. "My son, Miro," Kael nodded, stepping back as guards unshackled her. "Let's get you home." The Starling's ramp was down when they returned, Miro sprinting out, his crystal forgotten. "Mama!" he screamed, crashing into Lyra's arms. She fell to her knees, sobbing, her green hands cupping his face. "My boy," she whispered, voice breaking, "my star." She sang then, a clarion lullaby, soft, jagged, like waves on a rocky shore, her words weaving love and loss into every note. Kael stood back, Saris beside him, her hand brushing his arm, a quiet anchor. "You did it," she said, eyes bright. He shrugged, grin lopsided. "Told you, Songbird. I'm a miracle worker. Or a lucky idiot. Flip a coin." Miro looked up, tears streaking his face. "You're the best, Kael." "Mama, he's got a ship and burns food, but he's awesome." Lyra smiled, weak but warm, holding Miro tight. "Thank you," she said, voice raw. "For my son." Kael scratched his neck, awkward. "Yeah, well, kid's got a knack for stealing hearts. Runs in a family, I guess." The Starling lifted off, crimson reach fading below, a red scar in the dark. Lyra and Miro curled together, her lullaby lingering, while Saris watched Kael, something new in her eyes. Not trust, not yet, but close. Kael met her gaze, his grin softening. "What's next, Songbird? Saving the galaxy? Or just dinner?" She didn't answer, but her smile, small, real, said enough. The star spun on, and the Starling carried them forward, toward whatever came next. The Starling hovered above Arinder like a weary bird, its hull kissed by the planet's soft glow. Below, forests shimmered like lanterns strung across the night, their leaves pulsing with bioluminescent greens and blues, while rivers wove through them, humming melodies no voice could match. It was a world of dreams, a place where wounds might heal, and Kael Draven stood on the ship's ramp, hands in his pockets, trying not to look as out of place as he felt. "Well," he said, grinning at the view, "if I had to pick a spot to start over, this ain't bad. Beats my usual haunts, dives with warm beer and grumpy robots." Miro bounced beside him, silver eyes wide, his crystal shard tucked safely in his patched jacket. Lyra, his mother, stood tall despite her thin frame, her green skin catching the forest's light, her braid a quiet defiance against the years of chains. She held Miro's hand, her smile fragile but real, like a flower pushing through cracked stone. "It's beautiful," she said, voice soft, her clarion accent lilting. "A place for stories again." Kael nodded, scratching his neck. "Stories, huh? Hope they're the kind with happy endings. You deserve a few, after everything." Saris lingered at the ramp's edge, her purple skin glowing like a twilight tide under Arinder's radiance. Her black hair spilled over her shoulders, framing curves that her loose tunic couldn't hide, hips that curved like a song, a chest that rose with each measured breath. Her eyes, dark and deep, followed Miro, but there was a hollowness in them, like a part of her was slipping away with the boy who'd called her Songbird. "Hey, kid," Kael said, nudging Miro, "you're going to visit us, right? Don't go all fancy planet guy, and forget the Starling's charm. I mean, who else has my gourmet glow?" Miro laughed, throwing his arms around Kael's waist. "Never. You got to come see my new house. Mama says we'll have a garden, with glow flowers and everything." "Glow flowers," Kael said, raising an eyebrow. "Fancy. I'm jealous. My plants just die. Tragically. Every time." Lyra knelt, cupping Miro's face, then looked at Kael and Saris. "You gave me my son," she said, voice thick. "I'll never have words enough for that." Kael waved a hand, grin lopsided. "Nah, it was a team effort. Plus, Miro's too cute to leave behind. I'm selfish like that." Saris stepped forward, her voice low, steady. "Take care of him," she said to Lyra, then softer, to Miro, Keep singing, little star. Moreau hugged her, his small arms tight. I will, Songbird. You sing too, okay? Promise. Her lips curved, a ghost of a smile. Promise, she whispered, brushing his curls. As Lyra and Moreau walked down the ramp, their silhouettes blending into Arinder's light, Sarah stood frozen, her hands clenched at her sides. Kael watched her, his grin fading. Hey, he said, stepping closer but not too close. You okay, Songbird? That was a lot. She didn't turn, her voice barely audible. They're gone, she said like naming a wound. He was a light, and now it's quiet. Kael's chest tightened. He knew that quiet, Lila's absence had carved it into him years ago. Yeah, he said, soft, but quiet ain't empty. You gave him a chance, Saris. That's not nothing. She looked at him then, eyes shimmering, not with tears, but something raw, unguarded. You make it sound simple, she said, a hint of challenge in her tone. He chuckled, leaning against the ramp's frame. Simple? Me? Nah, I'm a mess wrapped in charm. But you're not just surviving anymore. You're shining, Songbird, like nebula-level shining. Her lips twitched, and she stepped past him, heading inside. You talk too much, she said, but there was warmth in it, like a door cracking open. The starling lifted off, Arinder shrinking to a glowing speck, and Kael found Saris in the cockpit, her fingers tracing the console's lights. The stars beyond painted her skin in silvers and golds, her curves a quiet symphony, hips swaying as she shifted, chest rising with a sigh. He leaned against the door, heart thudding. So, he said, keeping it light, we're officially kid-free. Thinking of turning Miro's bunk into a disco? I got moves, you know. She glanced over, eyes narrowing, but a smile played at her lips. You dance as well as you cook. Ouch, Kael said, clutching his chest. Low blow, Songbird. My cooking's legendary. Somewhere. Probably. She laughed, small, fleeting, but real, and it hit him like a comet. He crossed the room, checking the NAV screen, standing closer than he meant to. His arm brushed hers, and she didn't pull away. Gotta tweak the stabilizers, he said, voice lower now. Unless you want us wobbling like my last date. Her breath hitched, and she turned, their faces inches apart. Kael's hand moved, almost on its own, grazing the small of her back where her tunic gapped, revealing skin smooth as velvet, warm as a hidden flame. The curve just above her hips felt like a secret carved in starlight, and his fingers lingered, electric, sparking something deep in his gut. Saris trembled, her lips parting, a soft flush darkening her purple cheeks. Her eyes locked on his, wide, searching, like she was falling and waiting for him to catch her. Whoa, Kael said, voice rough, pulling back a fraction. Sorry, Songbird. Didn't mean to, invade your orbit. You good? She didn't speak, but her hand caught his sleeve, holding him there. Kael, she said, voice trembling, I'm scared. Loving you, it might make me weak. His grin softened, eyes warm, steady. Weak? Nah, love doesn't break you, Saris. It's fuel, makes you burn brighter, live louder. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, careful, like touching a dream. You're already a supernova. I'm just lucky to be in your glow. Her breath caught, and she surged forward, lips crashing into his, clumsy, fierce, like waves breaking on a jagged shore. Kael froze for half a heartbeat, then kissed her back, hands framing her face, pulling her into a dance with no steps, only heat. Her mouth was soft, tasting of mint and longing, her body pressing closer, curves molding against him like a song he'd always known. The cockpit spun, stars blurring, and Kael's heart roared like a ship-breaking atmosphere. They stumbled back, the moment a tide, pulling them under, and the starlings seemed to hum in tune. Beyond the glass, a nebula bloomed, purple and gold, swirling like a lover's vow, its light spilling through the ship in waves. In the dimness of a quiet cabin, shadows danced, two souls weaving together, their breaths a rhythm older than stars. Like comets colliding, they burned, fierce and fleeting, not needing words, only the truth of touch. The nebula's glow faded, leaving the starling to drift, silent, carrying a new promise in its steel heart. Kael woke to dawn's light, or what passed for it in space. Saris curled beside him, her skin a soft glow against the sheets. He grinned, propping himself on an elbow. "Morning, Songbird," he said, voice husky. "So is that okay? I mean, I'm no Nebula, but I try." She stirred, eyes meeting his, warm, unguarded. "More than okay," she said, a smile breaking through. "I chose you, Kael. Not because you saved me. Because you make me me." His heart flipped, but he kept it light. "Damn, that's high praise. I'm framing that one. Right next to my Best Gloop award." She laughed, swatting his arm, and the starling hummed on, stars winking like they knew a secret. Kael pulled her close, grinning. "So what's next? Galaxy tour? Or just you, me, and a lot of coffee?" Her smile was answer enough, a spark, a vow, a beginning. The starling rested on Thalura's shore like a tired traveler, its scarred hull gleaming under a sky awash with stars. The planet was a poem written in light and wind, seas sparkling like shattered pearls, their waves whispering secrets to silver sands, rolling hills cloaked in emerald grass, dotted with wildflowers that exhaled a honeyed scent, and breezes that sang, soft as a lullaby, welcoming two wanderers who'd forgotten what welcome felt like. Kael Draven stood on the beach, boots sinking into cool sand, his leather jacket slung over one shoulder. He tilted his head back, grinning at the cosmos. "Well, universe," he said, "you're showing off tonight." "Thalira? 10 out of 10. No grumpy robots, no beren globe. I might retire here." Saris walked beside him, her bare feet leaving delicate prints, her purple skin shimmering like a twilight flame under the starlight. Her black hair danced in the wind, brushing shoulders that no longer hunched under fear. Her tunic clung to her curves, hips swaying like a gentle tide, chest rising with each free breath, making her look less like the songbird of Drank's Vale and more like a queen claiming her own story. Her eyes, once voids of doubt, now held a quiet fire, reflecting the sea's glow as she gazed at the horizon. Kael glanced at her, his grin softening. "You're awfully quiet, Songbird," he said, kicking a pebble that skittered into the surf. "What's cooking in that nebula brain of yours? Planning a light sculpture masterpiece? Or just judging my beach fashion?" She smiled. A real one, small but bright, like a star breaking through clouds. "You never stop talking," she said, voice warm, teasing, her Valethian accent curling around the words like a melody. "Guilty," Kael said, spreading his hands. "It's a curse. Or a gift, depending on who you ask. Marodes say curse. Kid's got no taste." He paused, softer now. "Seriously, though, you good? Thalira's a long way from everything." Sarah stopped, her toes curling in the sand, the sea lapping at her feet. She looked out, where waves met sky, and her voice came slow, deliberate, like she was unwrapping a truth. "I used to think freedom was running," she said. "Away from chains, from pain, from Valetha's ghosts. But here," she pressed a hand to her chest, over her heart. "Here, I feel it. Standing still, breathing, choosing. That's freedom." Kael's grin faded, replaced by something raw, open. "Damn, Songbird," he said, voice low. "You keep saying stuff like that. I'm gonna need a bigger heart to hold it all." "That's beautiful." She turned to him, eyes searching his, the wind tugging her hair across her cheek. "You gave me this," she said, softer. "Not the planet. Not the ship. You gave me me." He scratched his neck, awkward, his usual quips faltering. "Me? Nah. I'm just a guy with a rusty ship and bad cooking. You found yourself, Saris. I just held the flashlight." Her laugh was quiet, like bells in a distant field, and it hit him like sunlight. They walked on, the beach stretching endless before them, the starling a silent sentinel behind. Kael's hand brushed hers, accidental at first, then deliberate, his fingers lacing with hers, warm and sure. She didn't pull away, her grip tightening, like an anchor in a storm she no longer feared. "So," he said, swinging their joined hands, "what's the plan, Songbird? Stay here, build a sandcastle empire? Or keep flying, chase some stars?" I'm game for anything, long as you're there. She tilted her head, considering, her lips curving. You'd follow me anywhere, wouldn't you? He grinned, winking. Anywhere's better with you. Plus, someone's got to keep the starling from falling apart. You're the light fixer. I'm the morale officer. Official title, by the way. Her smile widened, and she stopped again, facing him, the sea framing her like a painting. I thought the universe was dark, she said, voice steady, eyes locked on his. Cold. Empty. I believed light was a lie, something to trick fools. But you... She stepped closer, her hand resting on his chest, over his racing heart. You make it real, Kael. You make me want to believe. His breath caught, his grin melting into something softer, truer. Saris, he said, voice rough, I spent years thinking the dark was all I'd get. Lost my sister, my way, most of my good sense. But you? You're my light. Not borrowed, not stolen, just you. She rose on her toes, her lips brushing his. Not fierce like before, but gentle, a promise sealed in salt and starlight. He kissed her back, hands cradling her face, the world narrowing to her warmth, her breath, her truth. The sea sang, the wind danced, and for a moment, they were the only two souls in the galaxy. They climbed a low cliff, hand in hand, until they stood on a rocky outcrop, the Lyra sprawling below, seas glittering, hills whispering, stars blazing above like a vow. Kael pulled her close, his arm around her waist, her curves soft against him, her scent, mint and freedom, filling his lungs. Look at that, he said, nodding at the sky. Whole universe out there, and we're here, stealing its best view. Not a bad deal, right? She leaned into him, her head on his shoulder, hair tickling his cheek. Not bad, she said, a playful edge at her voice. But you still can't cook. He laughed, loud and free, the sound echoing over the waves. Okay, you win. I'll stick to flying, you handle the art. Deal, she said, her smile a beacon in the dark. Miro's face flashed in her mind then, his gap-toothed grin, his comet stories, and she heard Lyra's lullaby in the wind, a faint echo of love that had sparked her own. I see him, she murmured, almost to herself. In the waves, the stars. He gave me hope, Kael. They both did. Kael squeezed her hand, his voice soft. Kid's a firecracker. Bet he's growing glowflowers right now, telling Arinder all about his songbird. And Lyra, she's singing again. You gave them that. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but gratitude. And you gave me them, she said. This. Us. He grinned, tilting her chin up. Us, huh? I like the sound of that. Kael and Saris, Galaxy's weirdest team, ready to make more trouble. She laughed, the sound weaving into the sea's song. Always, she said, her voice a vow. They stood there, hands entwined, the cliff solid beneath them, the starling waiting like a home that could fly. Their footprints stretched behind, not jagged or lost, but straight, deliberate, a declaration carved in sand. We belong to each other and to the stars. The universe spun on, vast and wild, but for Kael and Saris, this moment was enough. A peace hard won, a promise unspoken, a light that would never fade. Kael looked at her, his grin boyish, eternal. So, songbird, he said, where to next? Got a whole sky to chase. Or we could just stay here, hogging the best cliff in the cosmos. She smiled, eyes bright as the stars above. Anywhere, she said, squeezing his hand. As long as it's with you. The starling hummed, ready, and the Lyra sang them into the night. Two lost stars who'd found their orbit at last.